All right, so what we're going to look at now is a little bit more about how we actually control the endocrine system. So we've talked a little bit about hormones and some of the ways they have their mechanism of action, or things like that. What we're going to do now is talk about overall control of the endocrine system, and then after that we are going to get into what are the hormones of a particular gland and what do those hormones do. What we're really going to see here is it's really the hypothalamus. So that part within the midbrain and the diencephalon, beneath the thalamus and underneath the corpus callosum, and really just connected on the stalk to the pituitary gland. This is what is going to be controlling the endocrine system, and there's really three main mechanisms by which it does it. The first mechanism is the hypothalamus, which is part of the endocrine system. It acts as an endocrine gland. And we're going to see there's good blood supply to this, and this portal system, which is really the set of capillaries goes into some veins and then to another bed of capillaries. This is allowing what are called releasing hormones or regulatory hormones from the hypothalamus to be released and act on target cells in the anterior pituitary. That is one way it's controlled. The second way it's controlled is through nerve impulses. So the hypothalamus makes and stores ADH and oxytocin at the end of axons in the posterior pituitary, and there's a nice capillary bed there. So by nerve impulse, it can send a nerve impulse down there and cause a release of these hormones into the bloodstream of antidiuretic hormone, otherwise known as ADH, and oxytocin. The third way the hypothalamus is doing this is going to be through control of that sympathetic nervous system. It can act on the adrenal gland, and specifically the adrenal medulla in the adrenal gland, and cause a release of epinephrine and norepinephrine into the bloodstream there. And that will have the effects that those hormones would. So those are really the three main mechanisms by which the hypothalamus is really controlling the entire endocrine system. The endocrine system, as again we've seen, it's really kind of grouped together on hormones that are doing a similar thing, which is releasing, not hormones, but glands that are doing a similar thing and releasing hormones into the bloodstream. Unlike a lot of systems, these organs are not connected to one another by really anything other than blood supply, which connects, honestly, everything in the body. So it's not like the respiratory system that's connected all together as that set of tubing. It's not the digestive tract, which is a tube that's starting at the mouth and ending at the anus type of thing. These are separate glands that really their only interaction is by the bloodstream. We're going to see the pituitary gland is also known as the hypophysis. It's not hypothesis, hypophysis. That is another name for the pituitary gland. We're going to see it is subdivided into an anterior, middle, and posterior pituitary. Or we'll see there is some different names for that too, the adeno and neurohypophysis for anterior and posterior. But it is a number of hormones that are released from here. These are all going to act through second messenger systems to have their action at their target cells. Some of them are going to act indirectly on target cells. Other ones are what we refer to as tropic hormones. And I believe that I have that on another slide, but a tropic hormone is an endocrine hormone that acts on another endocrine gland to cause it to release a hormone. So this is the pituitary gland, which is directly beneath the hypothalamus. This sets in that sella turcica of the skull, that little Turkish saddle that we talked about. It is connected to the hypothalamus by this little stalk called the infundibulum. And we can see it is really subdivided into an anterior lobe and a posterior lobe. And we do have the few different names on some of the stuff here. So you have the pars tuberalis, pars distalis, and pars intermedia, which is kind of that middle pituitary. And then you have the pars nervosa, which is the posterior part of the pituitary. And we're going to see that anterior part, the pars distalis, is going to release 6 different hormones. You have the middle one there releasing something called MSH, which is melanocyte stimulating hormone. Big wild guess onto what it stimulates. And then we have ADH, which is antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin being released from that pars nervosa, which is the posterior pituitary. Makes them look similar size here. The anterior pituitary is actually in real life a little bit larger than the posterior pituitary. And what we're going to see is we have this capillary network that is called a hypophyseal portal system. Portal system, again, is 2 interconnected capillary beds, either in the venous or arterial kind of network there. We see them in the digestive tract, as well as here, and there is a third one as well in the kidneys. So what this means, though, is in the anterior pituitary, there is a capillary bed of the primary plexus, which is the network with the hypothalamus. You then have a secondary one in the anterior pituitary, which is getting that blood supply that was originally up at the hypothalamus down to the pituitary, and is connected by these two hypophyseal portal veins that are connecting these two areas. And I think we'll see a picture in just a second here. So you can see here's that first plexus where it's picking up these hypothalamic hormones and then traveling through these portal veins down to here where it connects and target cells in the anterior pituitary. And you can see it again on this one here as well. So interconnecting the blood supply, going again, the flow is going this direction in here through this capillary bed where it can pick up these regulatory hormones, which can then travel down to here and act on these cells here, cause them to release a hormone, which will then travel out of those hypophyseal veins, get back into circulation with the entire body, and go to their target cells, wherever those may be. Again, the anterior pituitary is being really, it's the combination of that pars discalis, pars intermedia, and pars tuberalis. This is being controlled through the release of what are called releasing and inhibiting hormones. Not surprisingly, a releasing hormone from the hypothalamus is going to cause the anterior pituitary to release a hormone, where an inhibiting hormone is going to stop the release of a hormone. So again, you can kind of see this feedback loop, and really when these hormones get released, they're going to act on either another endocrine organ or on the target cells in the body, but also feedback up to the hypothalamus, and we can get some nice feedback loops here that are going to regulate the levels of these particular hormones. So again, these hormones are going to be released from the hypothalamus, travel from that primary to that secondary plexus, and reach target cells in the anterior pituitary. Again, releasing hormones stimulate the release of a particular anterior pituitary hormone. Inhibiting hormones are going to stop the release of one of these, or at least tone down the release of a particular hormone. The names of these, not surprisingly, kind of go to what they're doing. So thyrotropin releasing hormone stimulates the release of thyroid stimulating hormone. Prolactin releasing hormone will cause the release of prolactin. Gonadotropin releasing hormone is going to cause the release of the two gonadotropins, which are follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Corticotropin releasing hormone is going to cause the release of ACTH, also known as adrenocorticotropic hormone. Growth hormone releasing hormone is going to cause the release of growth hormone. So, I mean, to me, these ones, they didn't get fancy on the naming. They didn't get crazy on the naming. It's really straightforward to what they're doing. And again, a lot of these work in this fashion. This is kind of showing you that a lot of these are actually going to be what we refer to as tropic hormones. So tropic hormones are an endocrine pituitary hormone that acts on another endocrine gland to get a secondary hormone out, which is actually going to act on the target cells. So we can see this with kind of the TSH pathway, or the thyroid stimulating pathway. You can see the hypothalamus would release thyrotropin releasing hormone, which is going to act on the anterior pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone, which is then going to stimulate, not surprisingly, the thyroid to release its particular hormone, which is going to be the thyroid hormones. So that T3 and T4, which we'll talk about later on, those hormones get released. And what happens in this case is they can feed back up and inhibit release at the pituitary and inhibit release of releasing hormone at the hypothalamus. So this is a way to control and regulate the release of these particular hormones. We can see that the corticotropin releasing hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, acts on the adrenal gland, causes the adrenal gland to do glucocorticoids. We can see the same thing with the gonadotropin releasing hormones, acts on that to release either FSH and LH, which are going to cause the release of either some steroid hormones here, which would feed back up, or some other things called inhibin, which can feed back up. That's more on production of the sex cells and less on the hormones there from the secondary organ. Main thing on all these ones is this is a tightly regulated pathway. So this is feeding back up here. Where you can get into trouble is, again, if you've ever heard of like people doing performance enhancing drugs. So like taking testosterone. Testosterone normally is going to be regulated. Gonadotropin releasing hormone acts on the anterior pituitary to release LH. LH then acts on the testes to release testosterone, which is going to act on a number of different target cells, but that testosterone also feeds back. What happens normally is if the levels of testosterone go up, it's going to tell the hypothalamus to tone it down, and they will drop back and stay within the range the body's trying to keep them in. If you're artificially dosing that, what can happen is it's sending a signal, stop releasing this, and it keeps seeing testosterone being released from this endocrine organ here, but the body thinks that's what's happening, but you're injecting that testosterone in. What it does is it keeps acting on this. If this continues on long enough, it can actually dysregulate the body because you can get a downregulation of receptors in a lot of this, and what can happen is you can lose you basically can get the inability to regulate your own production. So a lot of times what happens if you are taking a drug that's replacing a hormone or your performance enhancing drugs like testosterone, if you do those for too long, it actually will start influencing the hypothalamus and the pituitary to basically stop producing any releasing hormones, to stop producing any testosterone. And then when you cycle back off this, your body really doesn't have the ability to bring it back into production. So that's one of the things they say a lot of times with thyroid hormones. A lot of times once you go on them, you tend to stay on them for good. Again, we can get into it later on, especially with the reproductive pathways. There is some ways like with performance enhancing drugs and that, with testosterone, they've actually learned how to cycle on and cycle off, and some other hormones that you can inject that can restart your body's process. People have got much better at this, but that is one of the things that you have to worry about a lot of times on endocrine pathways is if for some reason the cell is overproducing something or you're artificially injecting it, it a lot of times can lead to dysregulation and loss of control of that particular pathway. And again, you can see the same thing with like prolactin or growth hormone. You stimulate the releasing of the growth hormone. It acts on a lot of other tissues. It also causes the liver to release these somatidins, which can come back up here and stimulate inhibitory hormone and inhibit growth hormone releasing hormone, which will tone down the release of that. So again, these things are tightly regulated, trying to make sure that they are staying within the right levels. And again, it's a lot of feedback pathways here. Again, sometimes a little bit more intermediates in it where there might be a couple of steps in there. But again, what they are triggering with these releasing hormones tends to feed back up and get back to them in terms of inhibiting and toning that pathway down once levels get high enough. So the next thing to really kind of look at here is what are these hormones of the anterior pituitary and what are they doing? So 6 major hormones on the anterior pituitary, or also known as the adenohypophysis. And like I say, most of these are of that tropic hormone fashion that are acting on other cells or other organs to release a second hormone, with the exception of prolactin in there and growth hormone kinda. So thyroid stimulating hormone, again, a lot of these are named in a way that are very straightforward. Thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, and a lot of times we will use the abbreviations on these, but TSH acts on the thyroid gland, and it's going to cause the thyroid gland to release a couple of different hormones, which, again, in subsequent videos here, we will take a look at the thyroid gland and what its hormones are and what those hormones do. But for right now, we're worrying about the pituitary. So thyroid stimulating hormone is going to stimulate the release of thyroid hormones from the thyroid gland. Prolactin, it stimulates the mammary gland in females to produce the structures that are going to lead to breast milk formation during pregnancy, post-pregnancy, when lactation is happening. It does help with androgen production in males. Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are pretty similar, males to females. There might be some minor differences, but they kind of keep them the same names. FSH, these are both named in the female, so follicle stimulating hormone, it talks about stimulating the follicles of the female. In the case here, FSH is leading to, in females, formation of egg cells. In males, it's leading to formation of sperm cells. Luteinizing hormone leads to really production of different hormones like estrogen and progesterone in females. Luteinizing hormone in males is going to really lead to more production of testosterone by what are called interstitial cells. If you ever see something that is interstitial cell stimulating hormone, that is another name for luteinizing hormone. The adrenocorticotropic hormone stimulates the adrenal cortex to produce glucocorticoids, and also there's some mineralocorticoids and other stuff in that cortex, but this is mainly about stimulating the glucocorticoids. And then finally, growth hormone acts on most body cells, is kind of converted with some stuff in the liver and that, and other cells to this insulin-like growth factor 1 and 2, which are similar functions. But the main thing is this is going to lead to growth of most cells. If you ever look at Guinness Book of World Records, anybody, tallest man, tallest female, have generally had some type of oversecretion of growth hormone. If you've ever seen The Princess Bride and Andre the Giant, he had what's called acromegaly, which is overproduction as an adult of growth hormone. Again, generally don't live long lives on that one. People have some issues, health issues, when you really get too much of that. That being said, growth hormone is one of those things that they definitely have abused as a performance enhancer in terms of allowing cells to grow a little bit better and therefore can heal better, recover better from workouts and things along those lines. The middle pituitary is going to release melanocyte stimulating hormone. Not surprisingly, this acts on melanocytes in the skin, so it stimulates the rate of melanin in the melanocytes. Again, usually tones down prior to adulthood, except in certain rare cases, generally disease cases. So this is showing you these different ones and their basic functions there. Again, should have an understanding of how these releases these would be caused and what each hormone is going to be doing. And again, a lot of this chapter is what is a particular gland. In this case, we're talking about the anterior pituitary. What hormones does it make? We've looked at these 6. Or 7 here. What do they actually do? What is the action of those hormones? So the posterior pituitary, these are, again, nervous system is causing the nerve impulse that causes the release of this. So these ones aren't releasing hormones. They are actual nerve impulses that are causing the release of this. But we have 2 main hormones in the posterior pituitary, or the neural hypophysis. That is oxytocin, which is produced by certain cells here, and different cells produce ADH. What are these doing? Well, how are they released? First off, it's a nerve signal from the hypothalamus through that tract to the posterior pituitary that causes the release of these hormones into the bloodstream. Again, ADH, antidiuretic hormone. If you've ever heard of a diuretic, it's something that makes you have to urinate. So an antidiuretic hormone is going to be something that really limits the amount of urination. So what we're going to see on these ones, and we'll get into how its mechanism actually works when we talk about the kidneys. But ADH, in the simple sense, what you need to know right now is it helps maintain blood pressure by reabsorbing more water at the kidneys. So we reduce water loss and increase water reabsorption at the kidneys. That's all I really need you to know about ADH for this chapter. Again, we will get into the mechanism of it when we get to the kidneys. The other one is oxytocin. This is produced, again, in the hypothalamus, released from the posterior pituitary. It stimulates in females letdown of milk during lactation. So contractile cells in the mammary gland called myoepithelial cells will contract to cause milk to be released during pregnancy when an infant is suckling. This is the hormone that was part of that positive feedback loop we talked about in AMP1 about childbirth. This leads to contraction of the uterus. This is also a lot of times acts as more of a neurotransmitter, and it will lead to attachment and feelings of closeness, again, in both males and females, bonding with infants or pair bonding after having relations, if you want to put it that way. Oxytocin is something that's released post-orgasm that tends to cause some of those feelings of attachment to other people. So it has a number of functions that are not just specific to this. But again, we don't delve really deep into that, but it is actually a very interesting hormone. So what we're going to do from here on out is now we're going to start going through the rest of these ones. So the thyroid gland, as well as a lot of the other ones here. What are the hormones they make? What do those hormones do? And again, that's really the last couple sets of this. If we are the rest of these shows are really going to be about what are these different organs and what hormones do they make? What are the actions of those hormones? And again, that in all honesty is understanding these regulatory feedback loops, as well as understanding which glands make what and what is the action of those hormones. That's what most of the questions, when it really gets to the stuff, can be on, is what's the gland, what hormones does it make, what do those hormones do. So I will see you next time.